Well, thank you very much, Sean, for leading us tonight. Several of us were wondering if Sean was actually going to make it tonight. You may be aware that Jesse is expecting, and due date is just about any day now. And so I think there's a little bit of a contest between Jesse Bell and Jesse White. And Jesse White, I think, is scheduled to deliver in the morning. So we have two new babies coming our way in just this next few days, and we rejoice with that. And Sean, we certainly pray for you and your family, as well as for John and Jesse White and their family. We're so glad that you've joined us here tonight. Now, if you're wondering why the thick glasses, I lost my contact just a little while before services. Well, actually about lunch today, I guess it was. So I had to put my thick glasses on. I don't normally wear these, but it was that or be totally, completely blind or blinder than normal. So just, don't let them throw you if they look like a raccoon or something like that. But anyway, a couple of things before we get underway tonight. I want to really encourage you, and I hope you read my article in today's Family News, because I talked about an event coming up that I believe is extremely important. On Saturday, October 5th, that's the first Saturday of October, Westside is going to be joining over 200 congregations throughout the United States in a brotherhood-wide effort to canvass our neighborhoods. And that morning, that Saturday morning, we are going to meet at 9 o'clock, have a 30-minute devotional, some instructions, and then from 9:30 until noon, we are going to go out in our neighborhood, and that is going to consist from Elm Street all the way to Lambert Terrace, West Pleasure all the way to Moore Street. And we're going to go door to door. Now you're saying, oh, wait a minute, I thought door to door didn't work. Well, Christian Chronicle reported some outstanding results recently. Church in West Virginia, 12 baptisms as a result of going door to door and meeting people. Most recently, a congregation in Oklahoma City baptized over 35 people because they went to people's door. Now, we're not going to be intimidating anybody. We're not going to be twisting any arms, and we're not even going to make it uncomfortable for you. If you've got a particular method of study that you want to use, feel free to do that. But for those that don't have any particular method, we're just there to say, we're from Westside. We love you. We want to pray with you if you have any prayer requests. We would love if you'd like to study the Bible. We have correspondence if you'd like to do that. Or we would love to come into your home and study with you, or have someone study if you'd like. But I hope you'll give thought to this. If we could get about 40 folks or 50 folks here that morning, we could knock that job out within an hour and then come back and we're going to eat pizza for lunch. But be marking that on your calendars, please. And let's have a good showing for that. Several of our elders and ministers have already committed to doing this. And I hope a number of you will as well, Saturday, October 5th. Tonight, we're going to be in John chapters 9 and 10. John chapters 9 and 10. And I want to talk to you tonight about how to live beyond your wildest dreams. How to live beyond your wildest dreams. Now, this isn't a health, wealth, and prosperity sermon. But it is a sermon that deals with the importance of our attitudes and our thought processes. Let me begin by telling you about a young boy who grew up in the inner city of Detroit, Michigan. His name was Benny. Now, Benny grew up with a lot of obstacles. First of all, he grew up in a very, very poor neighborhood. There weren't many jobs, high unemployment. There was a lot of crime in the neighborhood in which he grew up. Secondly, Benny grew up in a one-parent home. His father had left the family. He was raised by his mother. His mother often had to work 3 jobs. just to make ends meet to feed two boys, Benny and his brother. But she wanted her boys to learn. And so when they got old enough, she began sending them to the library, not just one day a week, but 3 days a week. And she began requiring them to read 3 books a week. 3 books a week. Not only that, she required them to write a book report and turn them into her. They did that without realizing their mama only had a 3rd grade education, and she could barely read and write herself. But she was insistent upon those boys learning how to read. And Benny graduated from high school at the top of his graduating class. He went on and graduated from Yale University, and then from the University of Michigan for medical sciences. And he became one of the world's leading pediatric neurosurgeons. You know who I'm talking about, many of you do. Dr. Ben Carson. He appeared on the Harding campus about 3 years ago and gave a marvelous speech. Today he is serving in the President's Cabinet as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. But none of that would have happened had it not been for the positive attitude of a mother who was willing to push her boys further than their wildest dreams would ever have taken them. So often, I believe we're limited by our own attitudes. The Bible talks about the importance of attitudes. Passages like Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart with all diligence, for from it springs the issues of life. Or Proverbs 23, verse 7, as he thinks in his heart, so is he. We understand that attitude is often more important than location. It's often more important than circumstances. William James, the father of modern psychiatry, said attitude is more important than facts. Attitude. And yet so often we limit ourselves by our own attitudes. We say, oh, I can't do that. We can't do that. And sometimes we have some really negative thinking. You ever notice that? I heard about an old grandpa, an old man who had a long beard, went way down on his chest. And one day while grandpa was sleeping, his 2 mischievous grandsons decided to have a little bit of fun. They took some Limburger cheese and smeared it in grandpa's beard while he was snoring. Well, it wasn't long until grandpa snorted and woke up, and he said, this bed smells terrible. He got out of bed and said, this room smells terrible. He walked out in the hallway and said, this house smells terrible. He walked out the kitchen door, said, the whole world smells terrible. Well, it wasn't the whole world, it was grandpa. Well, what I'm wanting to do tonight is help you, especially those of you who are younger and students. I want to help you eliminate stinking thinking. Okay? That's what I'm after tonight. I want to help you eliminate stinking thinking from your mind. And that's where we're going to go to John chapters 9 and 10. Now, a little bit of background on our context here. John chapters 9, beginning with chapter 9, verse 1, all the way through chapter 10, verse 21, are one literary unit. Remember, the chapter and verse divisions in your Bible are not inspired by God. They were not inserted there until the Middle Ages. So when you look at the original text of John's Gospel, what you find is a lengthy story that actually begins in chapter 9, verse 1, and doesn't conclude until chapter 10, verse 21. But there are some tremendously important statements made in this section of Scripture. Now, what's happening here? What's taking place? Well, Jesus encounters a man who is blind in John chapter 9, verse 1. And the prevailing question that Jesus' disciples ask is this: Rabbi or teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents, but this was done that the work of God might be fulfilled in him. Then Jesus told this man, Jesus spat upon the ground and made some clay out of the spittle, and he put it on the man's eyes, and told the man to go and wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam. And when the man did this, his eyes were opened. Perfect vision. Wonderful vision. Now you would think everyone would be rejoicing about that, wouldn't you? A great miracle had been performed. Someone who had been blind from birth, had never been able to see anything in his life, suddenly had his eyes opened and was able to see. Can you imagine the majesty of the miracle? And yet, the Pharisees were more concerned about the violation of tradition and the law. And so they began questioning, who is this man? They called in the man's parents and said, is he really your son? And the man's parents seemed to be almost ambivalent. All they had to say really was, yes, he's our son. Beyond that, we don't know anything. He is of age. Ask him. And so when they finally call the man in and question him, who is the one who has healed you? You can almost hear the caustic nature of their voice. Who is it? The accusatory nature of their voice. Who is the one who has broken the Sabbath? Who is the one who has healed you? And the man talks about Jesus. He says, it was this man. He must be a prophet. The Pharisees say, he can't be a prophet because he is a sinner. He has violated the law. He has violated tradition. The man said, well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But all I know is this: I was blind, but now I see. And by the end of chapter 9, the Pharisees are so irate with this blind man, a formerly blind man, because he continues to confess allegiance to Christ, that they end up putting him out of the synagogue. Now, Jesus comes back into the picture in chapter 10. And Jesus draws a contrast between the Pharisees and their harsh, caustic, uncompassionate spirit and his spirit of love and compassion and life. In John 10, beginning, notice verse 8. All who come before me are thieves and robbers. The sheep do not hear their voice. The sheep do not follow him. Verse 9, he says, I am the door. Whoever enters through me shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. The thief, verse 10, comes to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Do you see the contrast between the compassionate care of Jesus and the prideful arrogance of the Pharisees? Do you see the tenderness of the Good Shepherd as opposed to those who sought to scatter the sheep? I really think that's what John is trying to get us to see in this section of Scripture. The contrast between Jesus, the Good Shepherd, who healed this man of his infirmity, and the Pharisees who had become so callous in their observance of human tradition that they failed to see the need of people. They failed to see the need. How can you live beyond your wildest dreams? I think Jesus sets forth 4 principles right here in John 10 in these verses. And we're just going to use here in John 10:10, where Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. We're going to use that word life as an acrostic tonight. It'll be on the screen. Each letter is going to represent something that you and I must be willing to do to live beyond our wildest dreams. And the first thing is that of love. Love. It requires that we be loving people. That's what Jesus was saying. Elsewhere in the Gospel of John, in John 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus said, a new command I give you, that you love one another. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, that you have love for one another, he says. But he also says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. As I have loved you. Now, the command to love one another was not a new command. You can go all the way back to the Old Testament, Leviticus 19, verse 18. Love your neighbor as yourself. You remember when Jesus asked the Pharisees over in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39, or rather he was asked by the Pharisees, what is the greatest command? He replied, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is likened to it, shall love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that finds its roots all the way back in the book of Leviticus, Leviticus 19, verse 18. But notice what Jesus does here in John 13. Jesus adds a new dimension to this quality of loving others. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And suddenly that sheds an entirely new light on the concept of loving others. What kind of love did Jesus have for people? 3 things. First of all, Jesus had a persistent love. His love was not vacillating or wavering. Even when his disciples did not understand, after he had attempted to teach them and demonstrate things to them, he still loved them. And John mentions towards the end of the gospel that he loved them to the end. He continued to love them. Over in Matthew 20, there's a passage where the disciples are walking along, and the mother of of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, so their mother, Mrs. Zebedee, she asked Jesus a question. She says, Lord, grant that when you establish your kingdom, my sons may sit in positions of authority, one at your right hand, the other at your left. And Jesus said, you don't understand what you're asking. That's not even mine to give. Well, before long, the apostles are arguing among themselves as to which one is the greatest. Can you imagine that? This group of men who have been following Jesus now for some length of time, and they're arguing with one another. How do you suppose that conversation went? I think it went something like this. I think probably Peter spoke up, don't you? I think Peter probably said, well, I think I'm the greatest, because after all, I'm the one that when Jesus asked who he was. I'm the one who said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's back, of course, in Matthew 16 and 18. Or maybe Judas is the one who spoke up and said, well, hey guys, look who's got the purse strings to this organization. I'm the one who's been entrusted with all the money. I must be the greatest. I don't know, maybe Andrew spoke up. I don't think Andrew was really this type of nature, though, but maybe Andrew said, well, listen, Peter, if it wouldn't have been for me, you wouldn't have been here to begin with, because I'm the one that came and got you and introduced you to Jesus. I don't know, but they were arguing among themselves as to who was greatest, and even with that, Jesus continued to love them. Persistence. Jesus' love was pardoning. Speaking of Peter, you think of Peter's denial of Jesus. After having told him he would die with him, Peter turns right around and denies him 3 times. But after Jesus rose from the grave and before his ascension into heaven, the last chapter of the Gospel of John records Jesus talking to Peter as they sat across a fire from one another on the seashore. And 3 times he says, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Tend my lambs. Peter, do you love me? Jesus' love is a pardoning love. And third, his love is a powerful love. I mean, those apostles' lives were absolutely changed radically because of the love that Jesus demonstrated for them and because of the power of God which came to reside in them in Acts chapter 2. Now, if you want to live above your wildest dreams, you've got to have a heart filled with this type of love. Remember in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3, as Paul is talking to people who were so jealous of one another about various spiritual gifts. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12:31, he says, let me show you a more excellent way. And then he says, if I speak in the tongue of men and of angels, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. If I give all of my possessions to the poor and give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. If I have all faith and so that I could move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. Living beyond your wildest dreams requires us to have a heart that is filled with love for God and love for other people. I don't know if any of you remember the country singer Loretta Lynn. You know, some of you remember Loretta Lynn. Maybe you don't even know country music. I don't know. But Loretta Lynn sang a song that really made her famous. Anybody remember what it was? Yeah, Coal Miner's Daughter. And there was a phrase in that song. We were poor, but we had love. That's the one thing Daddy made sure of. I think there's something to be said about that. How about you? Now, let's look at the second principle, and that is involvement. Involvement. Jesus understood the importance of being involved in people's lives. Go back to John chapter 10 now. Right after he says, I've come that they may have life and have it abundantly. In the very next verse, verse 11, he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. My sheep know me. In other words, he is saying, I am the shepherd who is involved in the lives of other people. I'm the shepherd who is involved in the lives of my sheep. The Pharisees had set themselves up as the the keepers of oral tradition and the keepers of Jewish orthodoxy, and that was paramount to them, more than anything else. That's where their conflict with Jesus originated and finally culminated in the Gospels. Because Jesus was healing people on the Sabbath. And Jesus spoke against those Pharisees whom he said were like whitewashed sepulchres, on the outside beautiful, but inward they were full of dead men's bones and all types of corruption. So, Jesus says, I'm involved. Can you imagine a shepherd not being involved in the lives of his sheep? What kind of flock is he going to have? I've listened a few weeks ago. Shirley Williams brought me a CD and said, listen to this. I had preached a sermon a while back on the 23rd Psalm, and Shirley brought me this CD, and she said, you'll enjoy listening to this. It's a message by a fellow with an interesting name to us. The guy's name is Ken Davis, but it's not the Ken Davis we knew. It wasn't Uncle Bud. But this guy's named Ken Davis, and he grew up on a sheep farm. And he keeps talking about how the sheep were so foolish. He said he once saw several sheep in procession walk right off a cliff. One of them did, and the others were just following along. And they just followed him, walked right off a cliff, fell to their death. He said he had seen sheep drown in ponds where one sheep would go out into the water and the other sheep would just follow him because they didn't know any better. Can you imagine if Jesus were not willing to be that shepherd who is involved in the lives of his sheep? It would leave us in such a predicament in life. And that's why I say, if you want to live above your wildest dreams, you've got to be willing to get involved in the lives of other people. You've got to be willing to do that. I have a friend named David Fisher. I was reminded of David, in fact, just today. Diva Javiana and I were talking at lunch. A group of West Siders was together at lunch, and she reminded me of a friend of mine over in the Memphis area named David Fisher. David is a retired preacher. Preached for many years in Pennsylvania and then in the Memphis area. But since he is retired, David has been serving as a volunteer at St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis. He got started doing that because about 10 years ago, David's 3-year-old grandson, Sully, died from leukemia. And I was at that funeral. I know how difficult that must have been. But David has said that this is some of the most rewarding work that he's ever done because of the involvement it has given him in the lives of other people. If we really want to make a difference in our community, we've got to get involved. We have an opportunity here in just a few weeks to help out with the White County Foster Care Program again. We did that 2 times last spring. When is it, Robert? Oh, it's tomorrow night. I'm glad I asked. 6 to 8, tomorrow night. We keep the kids. Watch the kids while we serve a meal to the foster parents of White County so they can have a meeting and get some encouragement and draw some strength. You might say, well, why do we do that? Because we're getting involved in the life of a community. And there are other things that we need to be doing individually and congregationally. To live beyond our wildest dreams, it only happens when we get up off the pews and do something. It's wonderful to study the Bible and to pray and to sing and preach and enjoy this marvelous fellowship. But the way you make a difference is by getting involved in the lives of others. And you may be saying, well, Brother Steve, there's just nothing I can do. Can you use a telephone? You have a phone? Can you make a phone call to somebody this week? Tell them, I love you. I was thinking about you. Can any of you ladies cook and take a meal to somebody? I may have told you before. I probably have. I've been around long enough. Most of my stories I've told before anyway. But I've never forgotten this particular one. First place I ever preached. There was an old couple. Their names were Everett and Gladys Christine. They were both up in their 70s. I was a young guy, about 24 years old at the time. And I loved to go over to their house because she was a great cook. And Miss Gladys was kind of heavy set. She had trouble getting around. Her knees were bad. She had to use a walker. But she told me, she said, now, Brother Steve, I can't really get around real well, but anytime you need to take somebody a pie, or anytime I can help someone with food, you just let me know and I'll be there. And you know, she was. I mean, that lady kept her stove hot. Well, maybe you say, well, I'm not a cook. There is something that you can do. But it takes involvement in the lives of others. Now, got two more, and I'll hurry. The third one is fellowship. Fellowship. Jesus says here in John 10, verse 10, he says, when the wolf comes, the hireling flees. The hireling flees because the hireling is not the shepherd. And it's not the hireling is not the owner of the sheep. The hireling is one who simply has been paid for the purpose of watching over the flock. And so when the wolf comes, the hireling just flees. He just runs. He has no fellowship with the flock, no intimate relationship with the flock. And in order to make a difference and live beyond those wildest dreams, you must come to have intimacy in terms of fellowship with God and with other followers of Christ. You must come to have that close, personal fellowship that Jesus desires us to have. I think that's why he says, have this love one for another. Fellowship. You know what the word fellowship means? Joint participation. Joint participation. It's working together for a common effort. We see the early church manifesting this so often. They're in Acts chapter 2, after the church was established on the day of Pentecost. They're all together in one accord. They're all together praising God and having favor with the people, and the Lord was adding to the church daily those who were being saved. They're in Acts 2:47. They had this wonderful, remarkable fellowship with each other, and you read about that even further in Acts chapter 4, verses 31 and following. And then finally, the letter E, and I'm just going to let that stand for encouragement. Encouragement. I mentioned about 2 weeks ago, I think I preached about Barnabas on that Sunday night, and what an encourager Barnabas was. Well, I want you to see what Jesus did on this occasion. Notice this man who had been born blind, and now Jesus had healed him. And now, suddenly, it seems as if everyone has deserted him. The Pharisees asked the man's parents, "Is this your son?" And they said, almost apathetically, "Yes, he's our son," but no other comment than that. You ask him, he's of age. Can you imagine how that made this man feel? My own parents won't stand up for me? What about his friends? They didn't want to risk putting their lives in jeopardy with the Pharisees. Jesus was willing to come back to this man and encourage him. And that's what he does. When this man exhibited a need that was greater even than the blindness, the need for to be encouraged, Jesus shows back up and encourages him. Where would you be tonight if somebody had not encouraged you? In my office, I have an antique radio. It's a cabinet model. It's probably from the 1940s. Still plays. I don't keep it plugged in. It's all original, but I don't keep it plugged in, but it'll still play. It's got the old vacuum tubes, has to warm up. That is a very special piece to me because it belonged to my second grade Sunday school teacher. Her name was Sue Richmond. I don't know how old Sue was when she passed away, but when I had her in second grade, she must have been 80 years old. And I was grown and married when she passed. The thing I remember about Sue, I was talking to Jean and Frida this morning about this. She had blue hair. You know, you remember how the older ladies used to put that stuff in their, anyway. On a Wednesday night in August of 1975, I had been asked by Jerry Thompson, our associate minister, if I would give the Wednesday night devotional talk at church. Because after class, we all came together in the auditorium and met and had a brief devotional together. I worked and planned for that first sermon, and I got up and I delivered it. I had timed it out for 15 minutes, and I went through it in about 5. That's never happened since. But I believe when I was done, Sue Richmond was the first person. I was 15 years old. And I think that lady was the first person to make a beeline down that aisle and hug me. She was just little, short. And she just hugged me. I thought she was going to squeeze the stuffing out of me. And she said, I am so proud of you. Oh, you don't think that was encouragement? Oh. If you want to live beyond your wildest dreams, get in the business of encouraging people and see how far it goes. It will take you further than you ever imagined possible. And it'll make a difference in the lives of other people to boot. Now, let's wrap it up. Look, if you will, at the very end of this text, down in verses 20 and 21. Because even after all of this, there was still division among the people about Jesus. Some of the people said he was a demon, or that he had a demon. He had done this miracle by demons. But others said, no, he couldn't have done this. There was still division, and they had to make a choice about who Jesus really was. And that's what you and I are called upon to do today, to examine the evidence about Jesus, his life, his teachings, his love, his sacrifice, his resurrection, and to make a decision. Who is this Jesus? Is he someone that you're willing to live for? Is he someone you're willing to die for? And if you're ready to give your life to him tonight in obedience, through repenting from your sins, confessing his name, and being baptized into Christ, then do that this evening. If we can help you, come while we stand and sing.